Hey guys, welcome back. Now let's continue over on our scanning methodology. So right now we're going to talk about firewalls and I guess port discovery. So how do we knock on the system and how do we identify what's available? So I've got a pop-up message that came up onto my screen here. So I'm just going to get rid of that. Anyway, so I was just drawing this out before and I thought, wait, let me draw this out together and we can go through this step by step. So let's just assume that we have a machine over here and this is the attacker. And the attacker has an IP address of 192.168.1.50. And he's using a random port to connect to us or to try and connect to the web server that we're going to have right over here. So this is a server that he's going to try and request and see if what's available on that server. And we're getting a random port ID of, let's just say, 8831, for example. And those random ports are random. We can't do anything about it. It gets assigned on the system. Sometimes we can statically assign them. However, in most cases, it'll be just a dynamic sort of request, and that'll be assigned to us. So that source port is basically assigned to us. Now, let's say the web server over here is on an IP address of 192.168.1.211, and that's on port 80. So when there's a web service running on that particular server, in traditional traffic or traditional, I'm getting a low percentage variety, so let's continue, let's hurry through this. So in traditional network traffic, what would happen? So the attacker will send out a TCP request to obviously the server over here. And in that packet, there's gonna be a SYN request that, this attacker wants to connect with this server right here on port 80. Now, what would happen? So the response, traditionally what would happen is this server will respond back and he will say, cool, I've got your response. And I've acknowledged that I've received it, and I want to connect with you if you want to connect with me. Now the attacker has two options. He can finalize that request. He can send an acknowledgement back. I can say, cool, let's establish a three-way handshake, or the attacker can send a reset back and say, cool, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want to connect with you. Now, what the reset indicates is a really cool component. It just verified something really important, and it verified this. So in that response, it verified that there's a particular port open. And it's verified that port 80, in fact, is open. Why? Because it responded back to us with a SYN ACK. It received our acknowledgement, right? And then it responded back with a SYN request, and it basically acknowledged that it did receive our acknowledgement requesting for a TCP connection. So the problem with that now indicates that potentially there is an open port available for us to scan and to basically exploit if we need to, which is the scary component, right? Now that's a random port here. So in sort of other traffic, that's identifying the open port. If we want to identify a closed port, what would happen? So in the same case would be this. It'll be the same sort of scenario. However, this server is going to respond back with a reset only. It's not going to send a SYN ACK, and it'll allow us to send a SYN, but he's going to respond back with a reset. He's going to say, yep, no, don't have that port open, sorry. Right? So that just means two things. One, when the server responds back with an acknowledgement or a SYN acknowledgement, it basically means the port is open. Right? So it's port 80 is open, it's verified our request, and it's saying, yes, I want to connect with you if you want to connect with me. Now, if the port is closed, he's going to just send back a reset. And the reset just indicates that the port is closed and there's nothing on there at all. Now, let's just say we start tampering a little bit with the traditional sense of how communications work in the system. Now, there's a few things I've written down here. Now, in a normal, I guess, a packet, we can basically tamper with the flags. So what gets sent inside that packet. So if the port is open, so if we have an open port here, and let's just say we have an attacker, and the attacker is sitting here, and we have a server way over here. That's a server. Now, let's just say that this attacker wants to connect and wants to verify that this server is running TCP, port 80. Let's just say if there's any sort of web traffic or web services that are running on this particular web server. But let's just say, for example, that we don't use the traditional TCP headers. Let's just say we want to use other things. So in a normal network, you want to have these additional headers in the network that you can start playing with. So let's just say we normally have a TCP SYN request. Okay, that is the normal request that gets sent out. That's the header of the packet that would get sent. Let's just say, for example, that we don't send a TCP request. We don't send a SYN request out to that server. We don't want to probe that server with a SYN request. Let's just say we want to include something like, a fin signal, which means finish, or a reset signal, or a push signal, or a null signal, right? How would that server then respond? Right, and it's about thinking about the non-traditional sense. It's about using irregular sort of communication on systems and how they normally communicate, and not using the traditional sense. It's about going outside of that, knowing what's available to use, and then using those methods and seeing how that device responds. And now each and every single device, whether it's a Linux server or an Apache box or a Windows, each device will respond differently. And we need to know and see what that sort of looks like. So if this server then responds back with with no response, or it doesn't even respond at all, then it's verified that that port is open, right? Now, if we have the attacker here, and then, let's just say we've sent a fin request or a reset and a push or a null, or three of them, or one of them, or two of them, and this server then responds back with a reset or an acknowledgement, then that port is basically closed, right? It's telling us that there's nothing available, and there's nothing there for us to see, right? Whether this one didn't even respond, meaning that there is something there because it's being filtered, or it's being, the normal request isn't being allowed, right? And the thing with that is what we want to do is we don't have to use the normal TCP request language. We don't have to we don't have to follow that traditional sense of the communication and how it works, right? We have to push outside the boundaries. We have to push the devices to see how they handle things that aren't the traditional, normal sense in the network, okay? So that can potentially be a good thing. It can potentially be a bad thing. And let's just say a couple more things that I've got here as well. So just a bit of reading for you guys. Obviously, you can see what these are. These basically closes the TCP session, just indicates that it's a finalized session. It's finished. I'm done sending packets. And then that's a soft close. It'll close the TCP connection. That's just a reset, meaning I don't want to connect with you. It's just an instant stop of the request. So it just says, no, I'm going to reset it. Instantly aborts and says, no, I don't want any connection to do with you at all. This pushes the data without waiting. These are just basically simplified versions of how I simplified it for you guys. And the urgent is just an out of bounds sort of TCP flag that we can set. Now, there's other stuff that I want to talk just very briefly on. There's multiple scans that we can do when we're requesting, or when we're probing, or what I call knocking on the door, just to see what's open of a particular system. And one of the best ones are, I guess, the Christmas tree scan. And what it does is the traditional Christmas tree scan does a couple of things. It sets all these sort of flags, and they call it a Christmas tree scan because when you look at the actual payload information inside Wireshark, it looks like a Christmas tree, right? And we can go through it a little bit later together. So what it does is it basically looks for specific flags and sort of in the packets, right? So basically, if a reset packet is received, the port is considered closed. With no response, it's basically open, right? And it does that by looking for the ICMP packet, basically with an error and a code of some sort, right? And that's how it does it. Christmas scan, then you go finalized scan, null scan, etc. And there's a whole bunch of other scans, and we can look at them more in detail a bit later as well. So now let's just have a quick look at stateful firewalls and how the stateful firewall works. And basically, I've got a bit of sunlight coming in here, so I'm just gonna try and move the screen around a little bit because I can't really see very well. So in a stateful firewall, guys, these are traditionally used in larger sort of organizations. So anything with an organization, I'd say over 100 employees, will sort of use a stateful firewall. And what a stateful firewall does is a couple of things. It uses what we call a stateful packet inspection. So any machine that sort of connects to the internet, like we discussed before, will have a source port that will just, it's a random number that this firewall then remembers. So it keeps it in a packet inspection table. And in there, it will say, great, we have a user over here on 192.168, whoops, 192.168.10.10. with a source port of 8821, and then that'll put that in the stateful packet database, or the table, right? So as the traffic traverses out, this firewall will set that connection, and it'll set that connection, and then it'll put that information into the table there, so it remembers that for later, and then it'll make its connection out to the server over here, and then when that server responds back, this firewall is then going to look at that. It's going to look at that packet. It's going to say, "Great, I can see that this IP address is here with the source port of that. Is that verified? Yes or no?" And then it'll allow the traffic based on that. Now, let's just say, for example, we probe. What a stateful firewall does is basically it doesn't allow any acknowledgement. So what the firewall will say is, I won't connect with anyone unless I've connected with them before. And if I don't know who I'm connecting to, I'm just going to drop the packet and I'm not going to respond. And that's it. And you can't do anything about that. And that's great. We don't want the firewall, in fact, responding back, to attacker or to a user, for example, right? So in normal requests, if we probe the firewall, if we're an attacker here, and we probe the firewall with an acknowledgement of the packet, right? So normally in normal three-way handshake, what would happen? So we're going to send a SYN, then we're going to receive a SYN-ACK, and then we can acknowledge that, right? Now we're just sending an acknowledgement. So we're pretending that we already have an established TCP session with this firewall, and this firewall is going to do one thing. It's going to say, not happening, and he is not going to respond. Now, that's given us a bit of information. He's not responding, which indicates one critical thing, that there is a stateful firewall in place, and we know that because the firewall didn't respond, because the firewall does not respond to acknowledged requests. So this firewall will only connect with people that uses the traditional SYN-ACK, sort of SYN TCP handshake, right? So it won't connect unless it's already connected with you before and it knows who you are. So it won't allow any sort of acknowledgements or any of these sort of other requests to basically be probed, right? Which is a good thing. Now, if this firewall responds back, I'm just going to change the color here with a nice green. If we send an acknowledgement to the firewall, what did I go too far? I went too far there. Now, if I send an acknowledgement to the firewall, and if the firewall responded back with a reset, then there's no firewall in place, right? And traditionally what would happen for this, there'll be some sort of packet filtering firewall. And the packet filtering firewall basically allows the acknowledgement to come through, and it's really bad because it pretends like there's no firewall there at all. So what would happen there is then I can have full access to that host, or server over here, and then I can sort of start scanning that server for any other sort of FTP traffic, which will be using port 21, or any sort of HTTP traffic, which uses port 80, or any Active Directory services, which could be using 445, which are well-known ports for any of this sort of requests. So what would happen there? That's a packet filtering firewall, which indicates there's no firewall there at all, which is a really bad thing. We don't want that. So therefore, the firewall in the instance number one, which was a stateful packet firewall, it's not going to respond to any requests unless it already authenticated and approved those requests in the beginning. Okay, so let's move on. A bit of war dialing. So guys, war dialing is just a simple method. It's sort of an older methodology. It's still not widely used in today's networks, or in today's sort of, methodologies. It's still used, but it's not overly used as it was back then. So it was effective, I think, back in the 70s and 80s and 90s or whatever, probably late 2000s, I'd say. So what it essentially does is it brute forces, or we can sort of get access to corporate numbers. So let's just say we're in Sydney here, and our first prefix of our extension number is 8045, or we're in Melbourne, and we've got 9223. That's the first prefix. So we can use a bunch of tools to do this. It's not, if you've got a large organization that's got 10,000 employees, you don't want to start calling those employees one by one. You want to use the internal codes of the organization to start calling. It can be random and automized. There are a couple of tools we can go through, but I'm not going to go through them today. Just a little bit of an overview about what war dialing is. So that's a little bit about war dialing. And I'm not going to get too technical on it because it's not widely used. I thought I'd mention it. So what it essentially will do is it'll basically look out for any of those phone numbers. So guys, I just had to pause my screen because I had to move out of the way. There was just so much sun coming in. So to move on, it's basically to backtrack what wall dialing is. It's just basically scanning a bunch of numbers, right? So no one's going to sit there and just go through each and every single number. All we want to do is just verify that there's a user there, or verify that there's someone calling on a particular extension of some sort. So it's random. A good tool, I think there was Phone Sweep. Phone Sweep is an awesome little gadget. You just install the tool, run it, and it'll just go through a bunch of phone extensions to basically do it. I'm not going to get too technical or too in-depth about wall dialing. I don't think it's just sufficient enough to be talking about. And that's all it does. So it's just there to verify that there's a user, or there's verifying that there's a probe out there that we can connect to. And it's just verifying that the phone numbers are basically active and there. Especially if they're using large organizations such as like a PBX system that they might be running, or a voice over IP telephony system as well. Guys, this is going to be, this was a fun video recording. I hope that you did enjoy this. If you have any other further questions around scanning, keep sending me questions like you are. I'm always loving the response that I'm getting. If there are any other sort of thoughts or comments or feedback that you have, or if I didn't explain something as clear as I should have, please let me know and I can respond back to you and let you know in more depth, obviously. So, guys, today we discussed a few things. We discussed how to bypass firewalls. We discussed how to do packet firewall inspections and how they sort of filter the firewalls. And we discussed a whole bunch of other stuff as well. I hope that you found this series informative. If there are any other questions, please let me know. And until the next video, I'll see you guys I was going to say something else. I'll see you guys very soon. I'll talk to you guys soon.